She sat on the Mafia boss's lap to avoid her ex. He said softly, "I won't let him hurt you." The low thrum of the bass at the velvet anchor was meant to be a comfort, but for Lena Porter, it just felt like a countdown. She and her best friend, Jules Han, were nursing expensive cocktails they couldn't really afford. This was supposed to be a release, a single night to breathe after Lena had filed for a permanent restraining order, an order that felt like flimsy paper against a bulldozer. She'd been out of her apartment for 2 months, bouncing between couches. Her life packed into 2 duffel bags. Couch surfing, she called it. Running was the more accurate term. Jules was mid-sentence about a terrible dating app match when the air in Lena's lungs turned to ice. He was here, Caleb Dre. He stood near the entrance, his tailored suit a mockery of the civility he lacked. He was devastatingly handsome, the kind of charm that concealed the violence beneath like poison in a crystal flute. He wasn't supposed to be within 500 feet of her, but Caleb, who was already on the Bureau of Financial Integrity's watch list for some high-tech money laundering scheme, didn't care about court orders. His gaze swept the main lounge, methodical, hungry, a predator scanning the herd. "Lena, what's wrong?" Jules asked, her voice dropping. Lena couldn't speak. She just nodded toward the door. Jules's breath hitched. "Oh God, okay. The main exit is blocked. There's a private party moving through. Lena, the VIP section. My cousin works the bar in there. We can slip through the service exit." But it was too late. Caleb's eyes locked onto hers. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. He began to move, weaving through the crowd with an athlete's grace. "Jules, he sees me." Lena's voice was a dead whisper. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her heart. Jules grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the velvet rope separating the masses from the elite. "This way, now!" Lena's eyes darted past the bouncer, scanning the dim, plush sanctuary of the VIP area. Her gaze landed on the deepest corner booth, a fortress of shadow and privilege. 3 men in immaculate dark suits. 2 were built like bank vaults, standing slightly behind. The man at the center, however, was the picture of lethal stillness. He wasn't large like his guards, but his presence filled the entire corner. He nursed a dark liquor, his posture relaxed but utterly in command. Severin Costa. Even Lena, who tried to stay as far from Kings Bay's underbelly as possible, knew that name, knew the aura of quiet, absolute authority that clung to him. Caleb was only feet away from the rope, pushing past a waitress. There was no time, no thought, only pure, primal instinct. Lena ripped her arm from Jules's grasp and didn't just walk. She launched herself into the VIP section. The bouncer turned, startled, but she was already past him. She didn't slow, didn't hesitate. She marched directly to the corner booth, right up to the man whose name was whispered in fear by half the city. She didn't ask. She didn't explain. She did the only thing she could think of that would make Caleb Dre stop in his tracks. Lena Porter grabbed Severin Costa's shoulders for balance and sat down directly on his lap. The entire booth went rigid, the 2 guards, Orlando and Brick, tensed, their hands moving inside their jackets. The music seemed to fade. She could feel the solid, unyielding strength of the man beneath her, the warmth of his body through his expensive suit. He smelled like bourbon and cold night air. She leaned in, her lips brushing the shell of his ear, her hands gripping his suit jacket. Her voice was shaking so hard she could barely form the words. "Please," she breathed. Her eyes squeezed shut. "My ex is coming. He can't see me with you. Please." A beat of silence. He didn't push her off. He didn't recoil. Instead, she felt him shift, just slightly, one powerful leg moving to support her weight more fully. A heavy hand settled on the curve of her waist, not to threaten, but to steady her. It held her in place, a silent anchor. Then, a voice. So low it vibrated through her, rumbled against her ear. It was impossibly calm, impossibly warm. "I won't let him hurt you." The words hit her just as Caleb reached the edge of the VIP section, his face dark with fury. He stopped, his momentum broken by the impossible sight. Lena, his Lena, perched intimately on the lap of Severin Costa. Caleb's rage faltered, replaced by a flicker of disbelief, then calculation. He plastered on his performance smile. "Severin," he said, his voice straining for casualness. "Didn't see you there. Sorry, Lena's just making a scene. She does this. Come on, babe, let's go." He reached for her. Before his fingers could even get close, Severin's guard, Orlando, stepped directly into his path, a wall of tailored muscle. Severin Costa didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. He just looked at Caleb with cold, flat eyes. "She's here," he stated, his voice polite. "She's settled. You're not." He gave a nearly invisible nod to Orlando. That was all it took. The lounge's own security, who had been hovering nervously, instantly understood the shift in power. Caleb might be trouble, but Severin Costa was power. Two bouncers were suddenly at Caleb's elbows. "Sir, you need to leave the VIP area." "I'm with her," Caleb protested, his mask slipping. "The lady is with Mr. Costa," the head of security said, his voice final. "You're leaving the premises, now." Caleb was forced backward. He couldn't fight them, not here, not against this. His eyes found Lena's, and the look he gave her was a raw promise of violence. "I will find you. This isn't over." Then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd and pushed toward the main exit. The tension drained out of Lena, leaving her weak. She suddenly became aware of exactly where she was. She was sitting on the lap of the most dangerous man in Kings Bay, in front of the entire VIP lounge. Her face flooded with heat. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. A frantic bird in a cage. She started to scramble up, mortified. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." The hand on her waist tightened, not painfully but firmly, keeping her seated. "Don't move just yet." Severin's low voice commanded. He was watching the exit, his gaze unblinking, until he got a text. He read it, then finally looked at her. His eyes were dark, assessing, impossible to read. "He's left the building." Only then did his hand loosen. He gestured to the plush seat beside him. "Sit." It wasn't a request. "And tell me everything. Start from the beginning." Lena slid off his lap, her legs shaking, and onto the plush velvet beside him. The adrenaline was leaving, replaced by a deep, vibrating tremor. The two guards, Orlando and Brick, remained standing, creating a human shield that blocked the view from the rest of the lounge. The bubble of silence they created felt absolute. Severin Costa watched her, his glass of bourbon untouched on the table. He didn't offer platitudes or ask if she was okay. He simply observed her, his dark eyes analytical. He asked, his voice still impossibly low. "He has a restraining order." It was not a question. "Why did he violate it tonight?" "He thinks I'm going to ruin him," Lena whispered, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap her nails dug into her palms. "The Bureau of Financial Integrity," Severin said, his gaze unwavering. "Why do they know his name?" Lena's head snapped up. Her blood ran cold for a different reason. How did he know that she hadn't said a word about the BFI? She realized in that moment that this man was not just a tough guy with bodyguards. He was informed. This was a different league of power, a different set of rules she did not understand. "And the MAPD," he continued, pressing his advantage. "Why aren't they protecting you properly?" 3 questions, each one precise, each one landing dead center. There was no point in lying, not when he already seemed to know half the truth. She took a shaky breath, deciding the facts were the only currency she had left. "Caleb's startup. Fintech Solutions. It's not real. It's a front," she said, the words spilling out in a rush. "He's washing money for a ring of cyber criminals. I was his chief financial officer. I found the real ledgers, the hidden accounts, the offshore transfers." Her voice cracked, and she paused, refusing to cry. "Not here. When I confronted him, when I told him I was leaving, he hit me. While I was down, he locked me out of our joint accounts and wiped my personal savings. He left me with nothing, so I couldn't run." Severin's expression did not change, but she saw the muscles in his jaw tighten for a fraction of a second. It was the only sign that her words had registered. "I went to the feds," Lena continued, the admission feeling dangerous. "To the Bureau of Financial Integrity. I gave them what I had. My name is in their confidential file now. Caleb must have found out, or he guessed. He thinks I have more evidence, that I'm going to testify. He wants to silence me. The MAPD, Severin prompted, bringing her back to his last question. He has a sergeant on his payroll, she admitted. The shame burning. Someone at the Midtown precinct, Mayor. Every time I filed a complaint about him stalking me, it just vanished. The restraining order was only granted because I went straight to the court, but it's useless if no one will enforce it. Severin leaned back, absorbing this. He nodded slowly, the pieces clicking into place for him. He's desperate, he said, his voice flat, confirming her deepest fears. He believes you're the one thing that can send him to prison, so he's cornered. A cornered man will escalate. He won't stop with tonight. The silence that followed was heavier than the bass from the lounge. Lena felt the trap closing. Caleb on one side, the feds on another, and the local police compromised. She was completely exposed. I'm offering a temporary arrangement, Severin said, his tone shifting to business. You'll stay in my safe zone for a few days, just until my people can verify who in the MAPD is leaking, and what Caleb's next move is. Lena stared at him. The whiplash was intense. A safe zone, you mean, with you? It's the only one I can guarantee, he replied simply. A new kind of panic, colder and more complex, washed over her. She had just escaped one controlling, possessive, violent man. Now she was supposed to willingly walk into the fortress of another, a man infinitely more powerful, whose world was built on a foundation of violence she couldn't even imagine. She was trading one cage for another, perhaps a more gilded one, but a cage nonetheless. But what was the alternative? Go back to Jules's couch and wait for Caleb to kick the door in the paper-thin protection of the law had already failed her. She looked at the man beside her. He hadn't lied to her. He hadn't tried to charm her. He had simply stated facts, in the dark. Twisted reality of her night, being protected by the Mafia, was suddenly the most practical, realistic choice she had. As if summoned by the thought, Jules crept toward the table, her face pale with worry. Lena, are you okay? I saw them kick Caleb out. What's happening? Severin looked up at Jules, his gaze polite but utterly dismissive. He didn't wait for Lena to answer. She's fine, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. She'll be safe with me tonight. Jules looked from Severin to Lena, clearly terrified, but she also saw the security detail, the invisible wall of respect the lounge staff had shown him. She saw the absence of Caleb. She gave Lena a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Be safe. Okay, Jules whispered. Okay, Lena, text me. She backed away, swallowed by the crowd. Lena turned back to Severin. If she was going to do this, she had to take back one tiny sliver of control. I'll go, she said, her voice firmer now. But I have conditions. A flicker of something amusement, perhaps, crossed his features, but it was gone as quickly as it came. Go on. I don't sleep in your room. I get my own space. With a lock. Done, he said immediately. I need my phone, and my money. What's left of it. I'm not your prisoner. You're not, he agreed easily, as if the thought was absurd. But your current phone is a liability. Caleb is likely tracking it. You'll have a new one, and access to your funds, before we arrive. He didn't even look at his guards. He simply spoke into the air, knowing he was heard. Tomas, prepare the residents at Costa Tower, the high floor. Activate the elevator lockdown. Access for myself and the guest only. Costa Tower, his private building in Kings Bay, a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the water. Severin stood, and it felt like the entire center of gravity in the room shifted with him. He placed a light hand on her lower back, a guiding pressure, not a controlling one. Let's go. Orlando and Brick moved in perfect silent formation, parting the crowd without a word. They bypassed the main entrance, heading for a private service exit that led into a reinforced underground garage. A black armored SUV idled, its engine a low, menacing growl. Lena slid onto the cold leather of the back seat. Severin got in beside her, the cab filling with his presence. The doors locked with a heavy, Final thunk. The SUV pulled out of the garage and onto the rain-slicked street. As they turned the corner, Lena looked back through the rear window, back toward the Velvet Anchor, and there he was. Caleb Dre stood on the opposite curb, shielded from the drizzle by a bus stop overhang. He was smoking a cigarette, the cherry glowing red in the dark. He was staring directly at their vehicle, his face illuminated by the passing headlights. His eyes were not angry. They were blazing. They were a promise of fire and retribution. He watched the SUV carrying her away, and Lena knew, with chilling certainty, that this was not an escape. It was just the beginning of the war. He was not going to stop. Costa Tower was not a building. It was a blade of black glass and steel aimed at the heart of the Kings Bay skyline. The SUV glided not into a public lobby, but into a private, subterranean garage that felt more like a bunker. The security personnel here were not in polo shirts. They wore sharp, dark suits and earpieces, their eyes missing nothing. Lena watched one man step aside to let them pass, his hand never leaving the inside of his jacket. This was not an apartment building. It was a fortress. The elevator was keyed, and it rose with a silent, hydraulic hum that made her ears pop. The doors did not open into a hallway, but directly into the penthouse itself. Lena's breath caught. It was not what she expected. There was no gaudy, old-world European furniture or red velvet. Instead, it was a masterpiece of industrial luxury. The ceilings were at least 20 feet high, made of exposed, polished concrete. Massive steel beams framed a 2-story wall of glass that looked out over the entire expanse of the harbor. From the glittering sprawl of the city to the dark, quiet docks, it was vast, beautiful, and as cold as the wind whipping off the water below. A small, older Asian woman with hair pulled into a severe, elegant bun stood waiting. She was dressed in a simple, immaculate black dress and regarded them with a placid expression. "Mrs. Kwan," Severin greeted her, his voice softening just a fraction. "This is Lena Porter. She will be my guest." "Miss Porter," the woman said, her voice a soft, precise whisper. Her eyes, however, were sharp, taking in Lena's disheveled state, the fear still clinging to her like a cheap coat. "The suite is prepared. Please follow me." She led Lena down a hallway of dark, polished wood to a set of double doors. "Your room, Mrs." Kwan said. Next to the door was not a keyhole, but a small, glowing biometric scanner, a fingerprint lock. Lena's condition met without a word. The room inside was larger than her entire old apartment. It had its own glass wall, its own balcony, and a bathroom clad in dark marble. On the king-sized bed, items were laid out with military precision soft, new pajamas, toiletries, and several changes of clothes simple, elegant cashmere and silks. On the desk sat a new phone, still in its box, and beside it, a platinum debit card. "These are temporary." "Mrs.," Kwan explained, her hands clasped, "until we can acquire your proper measurements and preferences. Mr. Costa has established a temporary bank account for you, under an assumed name. This phone is clean and registered to a ghost identity. You must not use your old one. It is compromised." Lena felt a chill. This was an operation. She was being efficiently, methodically erased and secured. She walked back into the main living area, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. Severin was at the massive kitchen island, pouring a glass of water. He held it out to her. "You are not a prisoner here, Lena," he said, his voice calm, as if he had heard her every thought. "But you made a very public choice tonight. In the eyes of this city, you are now under my protection. That makes you a target to my enemies and a prize to yours. The cameras, the guards, the locks, they are the price of safety, my safety, and now yours." He nodded to the burner phone she was still clutching. "Call your friend. Let her know you are unharmed. Be brief, and do not tell her this location, not even the name of the building." Her hands trembled as she powered on the new device and put Jules on a video call. Her friend's face appeared, pale and frantic. "Lena, oh my God, where are you? Are you okay, that guy?" "I'm okay, Jules, I'm safe," Lena said, trying to force a smile that felt like a grimace. She panned the camera slightly to show the elegant, impersonal corner of the room. I'm in a very secure place. The man from the club, he's helping me. I promise. I'll call you tomorrow. Be careful, Lena, Jules whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Please. I will, Lena said, and ended the call. Feeling another thin thread to her old life snap, later, after she had showered and changed, she found Severin in his office, a room walled with books. He was reviewing a set of blueprints. He didn't seem to have a casual mode. What is this? Lena asked, gesturing to the entire setup. What exactly do you do? He didn't look up from the papers, but he didn't deflect either. I manage a portion of the Harbor Street Council. She knew the name. Everyone in Kings Bay knew it. The council, she repeated, the words feeling heavy. So, the docks, the shipping unions, the underground casinos, protection rackets, all of that, he confirmed, finally meeting her gaze. His was unflinching. My father and his father ran it with fists and bullets. I try to run it with contracts and investments. I'm moving our interests into legitimate real estate and bay transport. But to keep the peace, you must still be willing to deal with the men who prefer the old ways. Lena processed this. This man was not just a criminal. He was an executive of a criminal enterprise. He was organized, powerful, and ruthless in a way Caleb, with his chaotic new money tech bro violence, could only dream of being. Caleb was a reckless bully. Severin Costa was a king, and yet he was the first man in months who had not lied to her. He didn't gaslight her. He didn't try to make her feel small or crazy. He stated his dangerous, amoral reality as a simple, unchangeable fact. That night, sleep was impossible. The imported sheets felt too smooth, the silence too absolute. Still wearing the oversized t-shirt she'd arrived in a last, comfortable piece of her old self, she slid open the heavy glass door to the main balcony. The wind was cold and sharp, smelling of salt in the distant city. She wrapped her arms around herself, watching the tiny lights of container ships moving in the dark. She heard a faint sound and tensed, but it was only him. Severin was standing in the doorway, a good 10 feet away, giving her an ocean of space. He was in a simple black t-shirt and dark sweatpants, holding a glass. He didn't move closer. No one here will touch you if you do not want them to, he said, his voice low, almost carried away by the wind. The locks are to keep them out, not to keep you in. Lena turned to look at him, the moon highlighting the hard planes of his face. Thank you, she whispered. A wave of confusing, powerful emotion washed over her. Gratitude, mixed with a terrifying awareness of her situation. This mafia boss, this man who controlled the city's dark underbelly, had treated her with more fundamental decency and respect for her boundaries than the normal man she had once loved. She was safe, she realized, precisely because she was with the most dangerous man she had ever met. The quiet moment was shattered by the buzz of a phone. He pulled it from his pocket, his face hardening as he read the screen. He answered, and his voice was no longer the quiet man on the balcony, but the commander from the lounge. Orlando. He listened, his body going perfectly still. Lena watched the muscle in his jaw knot. Where? He asked. A pause. Panamanian. I know the name. Keep your distance. I want to know what was in the package. He hung up, his gaze fixed on the dark harbor. The air around him had changed, grown cold and lethal. What is it? Lena asked, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Severin finally turned to look at her. His dark eyes were like chips of ice, reflecting the cold city lights. That was my head of security, he said, his voice flat and devoid of all warmth. Caleb Dre just had a meeting in an East End parking lot. A meeting with who? Severin's gaze was heavy, pinning her in place. A Panamanian arms dealer. He's raising the stakes. Lena, he's not just trying to scare you anymore. He's arming up. The news about the arms dealer hung in the air, a metallic taste of fear in Lena's mouth. The next morning, the penthouse, which had briefly felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a command center. Severin summoned his inner circle. Lena was in her suite, the door left open just a crack, an unspoken invitation to listen. She sat on the edge of her bed, straining to hear the low, Serious voices from the main living area. There was Orlando, his voice calm and precise, reporting on security and surveillance. Brick, the massive guard, spoke in short, clipped sentences about force and logistics. And a new man, Eli Vargas, who sounded younger, sharper, and handled finance and technology. Caleb Dre's network is shallow, but he's desperate, Eli reported, his voice clear. He's been making digital inquiries. He's trying to contact the South Pier outfit. A silence fell. Lena heard Severin shift. The South Pier outfit, they're disorganized. Small-time muscle. What would he want with them? Not their muscle. Orlando cut in. Their eyes. They have runners all over the docks. He's offering top dollar for intel. Your schedule, Severin, the car routes. Specifically, he wants to know when and where you travel, and if the girl is with you. He's not just buying guns, Brick rumbled. He's planning an interception. He either wants to grab her or take a shot at you to draw her out. Lena's blood ran cold. This was because of her. She was the target, the liability. We take him out, Brick said, his voice flat. A simple car problem. It's done by sunrise. No. Severin's voice was absolute, cutting through the suggestion. Caleb Dre is not just an abusive ex anymore. He's a federal asset. Sir, Eli sounded confused. The BFI, Severin explained, his voice patient as if teaching a class. They're building a massive case against his cyber-criminal contacts. Dre is their star witness. Whether he knows it or not, he's the weak link they're pressing. If he vanishes, if he's found floating in the harbor, the full weight of the federal government, not just the BFI, will descend on Kings Bay. They will tear this city apart looking for answers. That kind of attention is bad for the council. It's bad for everyone. He paused, and Lena could picture him, still, calculating. We can't make him a martyr. We have to make him irrelevant. We have to send a message so clear that even the South Pier outfit won't dare sell him a bus schedule. A public move, Orlando said, catching on immediately. Exactly. He's buying weapons because he thinks he's in the shadows. We drag him into the light, Severin said. We show him, and everyone else, that she is not someone he can touch. Later, after the men had dispersed, Severin found Lena standing by the glass wall, staring down at the city. You heard, he stated. She nodded, not turning. You're going to use me as bait. I'm going to use us to send a message, he corrected, his voice quiet as he came to stand beside her. Hiding you makes you look stolen. It makes him think he can steal you back. I need to show him you cannot be taken. He looked at her. There is a fundraiser at the Kings Bay Art Hall tonight. I am a primary donor. I want you on my arm, but you need to know what that means. There will be cameras. People will talk. Your name will be linked to mine by morning. Can you handle that? She felt a tremor of fear. To be seen, to be judged, to be tied to a man like this. But she thought of Caleb, of his burning eyes on the street. If I just hide, she said, her voice small but gaining strength. He'll just keep hunting. He will never stop. She finally met his gaze. I can handle it. A few hours later, Mrs. Quan arrived with garment bags. The items inside were not the short, tight, flashy dresses Caleb had always forced her to wear. They were different. A deep emerald green velvet gown that was modest at the neckline, but clung to her form with sophisticated power. A charcoal gray silk sheath that was all understated elegance. As Mrs. Quan expertly pinned the hem of the green dress. Lena found herself speaking, the words tumbling out. Caleb. He used to like taking me to parties. He hit me once, right before we left, because I'd spoken to an old college friend in front of everyone, and no one, not one of our friends, said a word. They just pretended they didn't see the bruise forming on my cheek. Mrs. Quan paused in her work, her sharp eyes lifting to meet Lena's in the mirror. She said nothing for a long moment, then returned to her pinning, her touch surprisingly gentle. Mr. Costa does not permit men to strike women. Mrs. Quan said, her voice a soft, flat statement of fact. It is not tolerated. It is the law in this house. The word struck Lena with the force of a physical blow, a law, in Caleb's world. It was a privilege he took, in Severin's. It was a line that was never crossed. Lena stood straighter, the velvet of the dress suddenly feeling like armor. That night, as they prepared to leave, Severin met her by the elevator. He was in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. He looked like he owned the night itself. He simply looked at her, his eyes traveling from her hair, now in a soft, elegant twist, down the line of the dress, and back to her face. He said nothing, but his approval was a palpable thing. The elevator doors opened. As Lena stepped inside, Severin placed his hand on the small of her back. It was not a push, it was not a grab, it was a light, warm, guiding pressure, a gesture of possession so subtle, so thin, it was barely there. But Lena felt it in every nerve ending. Her heart gave a single, hard thump against her ribs with Caleb. A touch like that was a warning, a claim that meant you are mine to break. With Severin, it felt like a shield. It felt like you are with me, and you are safe. The Kings Bay Art Hall was a swarm of old money and new power. The moment they walked in, a hush fell. People turned, their eyes wide, their whispers buzzing. They saw Severin Costa, a man who rarely attended such public functions, and on his arm, a beautiful, unknown woman. He navigated the room with effortless grace, a shark in a tank of goldfish. He introduced her calmly to mayors, to councilmen, to judges. His introduction never wavered. "This is Lena Porter. She's working with me for a time." The phrase was a masterpiece of ambiguity. It was not my girlfriend or my date. It was a statement of fact that bound her to him professionally, personally, or perhaps both. It was a claim, and it was a warning. It declared her his, and therefore untouchable. Across the street, in the shadows of an alley, a telephoto lens zoomed in. Caleb Dre watched them through the grand windows. He watched them laugh. He watched Severin's hand on her back, guiding her. He snapped several pictures, his knuckles white on the camera body. He zoomed in on Lena's face. She didn't look scared. She looked strong. She looked like she belonged there, a raw, possessive fury, so potent it made him shake, ripped through him. He lowered the camera and immediately sent the best shot to an encrypted number, a dark contact. The message was simple. "He took her from me. I want her back. Name your price." The art hall event had drawn a line in the sand. In the days that followed, a new, strange domesticity settled over the penthouse. Severin began scheduling his dinners at home, misses. Quan would serve them at the massive concrete island in the open-plan kitchen, the lights of Kings Bay glittering below them like a fallen constellation. Publicly, this was to maintain the narrative. Anyone watching, any rival, would see the boss and his new woman solidifying their union. But Lena knew it was something else. It was a test. He was reading her. With every quiet meal, every shared glance, he was gauging her pressure points, her resilience, her loyalties. But as he studied her, she was also studying him. The layers of the Mafia boss began to peel away. He was not just a man of silent commands and calculated violence. One evening, she found him in his library, not with a ledger, but with a worn copy of ancient philosophy. He spoke about books, not as trophies, but as tools. He told her about his childhood in the old dock district, a place of rust and poverty, a world away from the glass tower they now inhabited. He spoke of his father's brutal, simple reign and how he, Severin, knew it was unsustainable. "My father's men could break legs, but they couldn't read a contract," he said, nursing a whiskey. "When I was 19, a logistics company tried to cheat us out of 2 entire shipping lanes. I realized fists were useless against fine print. He had spent a year," he explained, sleeping 4 hours a night, teaching himself corporate law by lamplight. He learned how to leverage, how to counter-sue, how to use the system's own weapons against it. "I learned to be the man they never see coming," he said, "the one who owns the paper they're standing on." His admission, his vulnerability, unlocked something in her. She found herself telling him about her own work, the life Caleb had tried to erase. "I was an intern at a top architecture firm," she said. her voice quiet, tracing the marble countertop with her finger. It was my dream. I had a portfolio for my final review, months of work. Caleb got jealous. He said I was spending more time on my little drawings than on him. She swallowed, the memory still sharp. He didn't just rip them up. He poured an entire bottle of red wine over the blueprints, piece by piece, while I watched. He destroyed my entire final project, my references, everything. I lost the internship. Severin had been perfectly still while she spoke. He looked at her, his eyes dark, and the calculated calm was gone, replaced by something ancient and cold. "The man who touched your craft," he said, his voice a low, lethal vibration, "deserves to pay for it." The air in the kitchen, usually so vast and open, suddenly felt compressed. It was the first time his possessiveness had felt personal, aimed not just at her safety, but at herself. Their eyes held a silent, crackling connection that stretched far beyond the bounds of polite conversation. The warm, yellow lights of the kitchen seemed to focus, pulling them into a tight, intimate spotlight. Lena felt her pulse quicken. He did not move. He didn't reach for her, didn't even lean in. Severin was a man of immense deliberate control. He was acutely aware of the trauma she had just escaped, the violence that had been inflicted on her. He would not, she realized, be another man who took that restraint, that powerful, conscious choice not to wield his strength against her, was more magnetic than any forward advance. She was drawn to the danger he represented, but she was becoming captivated by the safety he chose to provide. A few nights later, the tension snapped. They were in the main living area, the television on low, tuned to the local news. A breaking report flashed on the screen, a 4-alarm fire at a warehouse complex by the water. The rival group, the South Pier outfit, testing his boundaries. Lena was only half watching, until the reporter mentioned an explosion. The live feed showed a secondary blast, a whoosh of flame followed by the sharp, shattering crash of glass and metal. The sound hit Lena like a physical blow. It was the exact sound of Caleb's rampage in their old apartment, the heavy fist through the drywall, the sound of her glass-topped coffee table being overturned, the shattering of her world. She made a small, choked sound. Her vision tunneled, the air in her lungs evaporated. She began to shake, her breaths coming in short, useless gasps. She was no longer in a billion-dollar penthouse. She was back on her old hardwood floor, cowering, waiting for the next blow. "Lena?" Severin's voice was there, but it sounded distant. He was off the sofa and in front of her in an instant. He didn't grab her. He didn't try to stop the shaking. He sat down hard beside her, a solid, immovable object. He pressed his shoulder firmly against hers. An anchor. "You're not there," he said, his voice a low, commanding rumble. He muted the television. The room went silent, save for her own panicked breathing. He put one hand on her back, his palm flat and warm between her shoulder blades. He kept it light, a position of support, not capture. She could pull away at any second. "Breathe with me," he ordered. But his voice was not harsh. It was a metronome. "Listen to my voice. Only my voice. He took an exaggeratedly slow, deep breath. "Out." She tried to follow, but her lungs stuttered. Again, He breathed with her. "Out. You're here. Lena, you're in my home. You are safe." He repeated the words, his voice a steady rhythm against the chaos in her mind. Out. You only hear my voice." Slowly, painfully, her hyperventilation began to subside. Her heart, which had been hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, started to match the steady cadence of his voice. The terror raced, leaving her boneless and exhausted. For the first time, she made the choice. She didn't just lean on him, she sagged into him, turning her face into his chest, her hands weakly gripping the front of his shirt. He held her. His arms came around her, securing her, his hand moving to the back of her head, cradling her skull. He just held her, rocking slightly until the last tremor had passed. He didn't kiss her. He didn't say anything more. He simply offered his strength until hers returned. Later that night, long after Lena had fallen into an exhausted sleep on the living room sofa, wrapped in a cashmere blanket. Severin was in his office. He was not working. He was staring at a bank of security monitors. One screen was split into 4 angles of the living room. He watched her. A deep frown etched between his brows. He saw the way she was curled into the blanket, still, but not at peace. He had spent his entire adult life keeping his enemies at bay, securing his territory, and ensuring peace on the docks. It was a complex, brutal game of chess. Now, a new piece was on the board, a piece he found himself unwilling to sacrifice. He looked at her sleeping form, and his voice was a low, rough whisper in the dark room. "Don't make me choose you over peace on the docks, Lena." The comfortable rhythm of the penthouse, the shared meals and quiet conversations, was a fragile illusion. It shattered 4 days after the art gala. Orlando appeared at the penthouse, his face a mask of professional concern. He waited until Lena was in the kitchen, just out of earshot, but Severin's voice, though low, carried a new, hard edge that made her freeze. He knew, Severin said. The South Pier outfit knew the exact route my car was taking to the harbor master's office yesterday. They knew the make, the model, and the tag number. A heavy silence. "We have a leak," Severin stated. It was not a question. "Yes, sir," Orlando replied. "I've contained it. The intel was bad, we weren't in that car, but they were in position. They were ready to hit." Who knew that route? Core team only. Me, Brick, and Eli Vargas. Eli. The finance guy. Lena remembered him from the one meeting she had overheard, young, sharp, with restless eyes that had lingered on her a moment too long. "Find out," Severin ordered, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more menacing than any shout. "Quietly. I want to know who is selling my name." The tension in the apartment became a physical weight. Later that day, it doubled. Lena. Checking the new email address Severin had set up for her, found a message that looked like spam, but the subject line contained a single, misspelled word she recognized the code phrase her BFI contact had given her. She opened it. It was an encrypted request for clarification. They needed more details on the offshore accounts, specific transaction dates from her old ledgers, anything she could remember to strengthen their case against Caleb. She showed the phone to Severin. He read the short message, his expression darkening. He understood the digital landscape far better than Caleb. "This request is encrypted," he said, "but the fact that it was sent can be logged. If Caleb has a trace on the BFI agents, he'll know they're still in contact with you." He looked from the phone to her, his mind clearly connecting the two threats. A mole in my house, and the feds breathing down your neck. If Vargas is the leak, and he tells Caleb that you're still talking to the Bureau. He didn't need to finish. Caleb would become explosive. "We're moving," Severin said, closing the laptop. "Not tomorrow, now." "Moving where?" Lena asked, her heart sinking. The tower, for all its isolation, felt safe. "The tower is compromised," he said, his tone final. "Mrs. Kwan is packing you a bag. We're going to a property in the Harbor Flats, a converted warehouse. It's off my books. Only Orlando and I know it exists." 20 minutes later, they were in the subterranean garage, but they didn't get into Severin's armored SUV. Brick was waiting by a simple dark blue sedan. The kind of car you would never look at twice. Brick drove. Orlando sat in the passenger seat. Lena and Severin were in the back. The silence in the car was absolute, a tightly wound spring. They cleared the downtown core and headed for the industrial sprawl of the harbor. "Black pickup," Orlando said, his voice calm, checking the side mirror. "Ford, been with us since the 12th Street exit." Lena's stomach clenched. She resisted the urge to look back. "He's hanging back. 2 cars," Orlando continued. "Not professional, but he's definitely on us." "There's another one," Brick rumbled, his eyes on the driver's side mirror. "Gray, coming up fast on the left, trying to box us." "Now," Severin said. Brick didn't hesitate. He wrenched the wheel hard to the right, jumping the curb and sending the sedan crashing down a narrow, one-way alley filled with dumpsters. Lena was thrown hard against Severin, who absorbed the impact, his arm a steel bar across her chest. A sickening screech of metal on metal filled the car as Brick sideswiped a stack of pallets. He floored the accelerator, shot through an open loading dock, scattering workers, and emerged onto a different street, speeding in the opposite direction. "We're clean," Brick said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Severin was breathing hard, not from fear, but from a rage so cold it seemed to drop the temperature of the car. He pulled out his phone. His voice was no longer calm or controlled. It was a blade. "Find Eli Vargas," he snapped. "Find him now. And Orlando. I want him alive. I want to know exactly who he sold me to." Lena watched him, her own fear momentarily forgotten, replaced by a chilling clarity. This was his world. Not the quiet dinners or the philosophical books. This was it. A back-alley car chase, a hunt for a traitor, and an order that promised a terrible, precise retribution. In this world, betrayal didn't just get you fired. It got you handled. She had to decide, in that moment, if she was his partner or just his package. The loft was raw. Exposed brick, old hardwood floors, a few pieces of mismatched, expensive leather furniture, and a single massive arched window overlooking the dark, oily water of the harbor flats. It was a safe house, not a home. Severin was pacing in front of the window, the mask of the calm commander gone. He looked tired, and he looked lethal. Lena found a small, dated kitchen with a few bottles of beer in the fridge. She opened one and held it out to him. He stopped pacing and looked at the bottle, then at her. He took it, his fingers brushing hers. "Thank you." They sat on the old leather sofa, the silence stretching, filled only by the distant foghorn of a container ship. "You know," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion, "if you left Kings Bay, if I put you on a plane tonight and you just disappeared, your life would get a whole lot easier." Lena looked at his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. She thought of a life in some new city, always looking over her shoulder, always wondering, always alone. "But you're not there," she said softly. The words hung in the air. He turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers, the danger from the car, the intimacy of their shared secret, the raw tension of the last few days. It all converged in that single look. He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She met him halfway, her breath catching, her heart hammering. The small space between their lips crackled with an energy that was both terrifying and inevitable. His hand came up, not to her face, but to her neck, his thumb tracing the frantic pulse just below her ear. He was a millimeter away. She could feel the warmth of his breath. And then he stopped. He closed his eyes, a flicker of some deep, internal battle crossing his face. He rested his forehead against hers for one agonizing second. "No," he whispered, the word a rough growl. He pulled back, his hand dropping from her neck. "Not now." He stood and turned away, running a hand through his hair. "Not when I still have other people's blood on my hands." It was not a rejection. It was the darkest form of respect he could offer. He would not taint her, not when his world was literally trying to kill them. Before she could speak, his phone buzzed on the table. He snatched it up. "Orlando." He listened, his body going rigid. "Put him on." A new voice, strained and terrified, came through the speaker. "Eli Vargas." "Severin, I'm sorry, I swear." "Who?" Severin cut him off. "Dre." Vargas stammered, sobbing. "Caleb Dre. He found out I was skimming from the transport accounts. He had proof. He blackmailed me. He just wanted the schedule. I swear. Just the car routes." "He's lying," Orlando's voice cut in, cold as steel. "We checked the offshore transfers. Dre didn't just blackmail him. He paid him. A lot." "Paid him for what?" Severin demanded. "That's not all, boss," Orlando said, his voice grim. "Dre didn't just pay for the schedule. He put down a $50,000 deposit 2 days ago. He's not trying to shoot you. Severin, he's paying for a professional kidnapping." A dead silence filled the loft. Severin slowly turned to look at Lena, his face carved from stone, his eyes reflecting the dark, cold water of the harbor. "He's not trying to get me out of the way," he said, his voice a low, terrifying realization. "He's coming for you. to pull me off the shore. The betrayal of Eli Vargas was a brutal, clarifying event. He was gone, erased from Severin's organization with a silent, terrifying efficiency that Lena was glad she did not have to witness. The immediate threat of the internal leak was neutralized, but the external threat, Caleb, now funded, armed, and aiming for a kidnapping, was more potent than ever. They did not stay at the loft. It was a temporary hold, not a fortress. That same night, under the cover of a drenching, city-wide storm, a fresh team brought them back to Costa Tower. This time, the security was tripled. Orlando and his men swept the penthouse, checking for bugs, checking the new security protocols on the elevator, installing new motion sensors on the balconies. The penthouse was no longer just a safe house. It was the safest place in Kings Bay, and they both knew why they had returned. When an enemy targets the boss's woman, there are two ways to protect her: hide her so deep she's forgotten, or bind her so publicly, so fiercely to your side, that an attack on her is an attack on the king. Severin had made his choice at the art hall. This was the follow-through. That night, the tension was a living thing. The storm raged outside, throwing sheets of rain against the two-story glass walls. The city was a watercolor blur of neon and darkness. The air conditioner, compensating for the humidity, made the vast space cold. Lena was on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, but she was still shivering, the day's events replaying in her mind. Severin emerged from his room, having changed into a simple black t-shirt and sweats. He looked at her, then disappeared back into his closet, returning with a thick, white, button-down shirt. It was clearly his. He didn't make a show of it. He just held it out. "You're cold," he said. She took it, the heavy cotton warm from his body heat, smelling faintly of clean soap and him. She pulled it on over her tank top, the sleeves ridiculously long, the hem falling to her knees. It was a simple, practical gesture, but it felt more intimate than anything that had happened yet. He sat on the sofa opposite her, nursing a glass of water, not whiskey. He was on watch. She curled her feet under her, the massive shirt swallowing her. Her fingers found the edge of his sleeve, and she absent-mindedly traced the small, jagged white line of a scar on his forearm. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked down at the scar, then at her. Not anymore. That was a long time ago. "Were you scared?" He was silent for a moment, his gaze unreadable. "I'm not scared of things that can hurt me," he said, his voice low and rough. He lifted his eyes to hers, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. "I'm afraid of losing something I can't replace." The admission hung in the air, a raw, vulnerable truth. He was talking about her, the fear, the adrenaline, the gratitude, and this new, terrifying warmth all crested inside her. He hadn't touched her at the loft. He had respected her. Even when he was clearly at his limit, he had waited. She was the one who moved. She stood up from her sofa and walked the few feet to his. She sat beside him, the cushions shifting. He didn't move. He just watched her, his body tense. She didn't proposition him. She didn't seduce. She leaned in, placed a hand on the side of his face, his skin rough with late-night stubble, and she kissed him. It was not a kiss of passion, but of decision. It was slow, and it was sure. It was "thank you for not being him." It was "I see you." It was "I am not broken." It was her choice, given freely, the first one that had felt truly, completely hers in almost a year. For a second, he remained perfectly still, as if absorbing the shock of her choice. Then, with a low sound in his chest, he responded. But it was not the violent, claiming kiss she would have expected from a man like him. It was a question, an answer, and a promise, all at once. His hand came up to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, but the pressure was supportive, not controlling. His other hand went to her back, pulling her closer, but not crushing her. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers, his breathing heavy. "Lena?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. He led, but it was not a conquest. It was a dance. He guided her to her feet, his eyes locked on hers, searching her face for any sign of fear, any flicker of her past trauma. His touch was a map, discovering her. but his primary concern was her safety. They moved toward the glass-walled bedroom, the storm providing a chaotic, beautiful backdrop of lightning and blurred city lights. He laid her down on the cool, high-thread count sheets, and the white shirt he had given her rode up, but his focus was on her face. He moved over her, a shadow of strength, but he supported his own weight, never letting her feel trapped. "You look at me," he commanded, his voice a low rumble. "Don't look away. You're here with me." He kissed her again, deeper this time, but he kept the pace agonizingly slow, as if he was terrified of startling her. He was deliberately rewiring her responses, replacing her memories of pain with this new, overwhelming sensation of being cherished. His hand traced the line of her jaw, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't know had fallen. "Is this okay?" he murmured against her skin. "Yes," she breathed, her voice shaking, not with fear, but with release. It was the first time in her life that this was not something to be endured. It was not a performance, or a violation, or a duty. With Caleb, it had been a weapon. With Severin, it was a confirmation. She was seen. She was safe. That realization, that he had taken her broken pieces and was holding them as if they were priceless, was the final thing that unbroke her. This was not his act. It was theirs. With a sudden, clear-eyed strength, Lena wrapped her arms around his neck, her legs tangling with his, and she was the one who pulled him down, her mouth finding his in a kiss that was no longer just grateful, but hungry. It was her final, absolute, and active consent. Much later, they lay side by side, the storm quieting outside, their breathing slowing. Lena was tucked against his side, her head on his chest, his arm a heavy, protective weight over her. He was quiet for a long time, his hand just tracing patterns on her shoulder. "From the moment you sat on my lap in that lounge," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper in the dark room. "I was out of options." Lena smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She tilted her head back to look at him, at this dangerous, complicated man who had just shown her what it felt like to be safe. "Then tomorrow," she whispered, "just keep not backing down." The information that Severin's man, Vargas, had been caught and dealt with reached Caleb quickly. The criminal grapevine was faster than any newswire. His inside track was gone. His connection to Severin's movements severed. That, combined with the whispers and photos from the art hall gala, confirmed his worst fears. Lena was not a prisoner. She was a partner. She had replaced him. The narcissistic rage, amplified by the BFI's net tightening around him, coalesced into a single, desperate plan. He made 2 calls. The first was to the depleted leadership of the South Pier outfit, offering a sum of cash they couldn't refuse for a high-risk, high-reward abduction. The second was to a disgraced ex-MAPD patrolman he had on a retainer. For an extra $20,000, the ex-cop accessed the city's secure impound lot. He located a Costa security vehicle that had been seized in a previous territorial dispute and, using a heat gun, carefully peeled the official, reflective decals from its doors. 3 days later, the trap was set. Lena's life in the tower had found a strange rhythm. This afternoon, however, was different. Severin was the primary patron of the annual Kings Bay Mariners Fund, his most visible and important legitimate charity. The gala was in 2 days. "You need a gown," he had said that morning, his voice soft. "Something that isn't emerald green." Mrs. Quan was tasked with the fitting. They traveled, as they always did, in a 2-car convoy, a lead car with 2 of Orlando's men, and the follow car, a heavy black sedan, with Brick driving Mrs. Quan in the passenger seat, and Lena secure in the back. The fitting was flawless. They were on the return trip, entering the long concrete tube of the Harbor View Tunnel. Just as they passed the halfway mark, the traffic ahead slowed to a crawl. A large flatbed construction truck was stalled, completely blocking both lanes, its hazard lights flashing. Brick slowed their sedan to a stop, leaving a careful 30 yards behind the lead car. "Hold on," he said, his eyes scanning the mirrors. That was when the tow truck, which had been 2 cars behind them, suddenly accelerated. It swerved, smashing into the cars between them, and then slammed directly into their rear. The impact was deafening, a shriek of tortured metal. Lena was thrown forward, the seatbelt catching her with a brutal, sharp pull. The sedan was crushed, pinned between the tow truck and the car in front. Before the lead car could even attempt to reverse, the side doors of the stalled construction truck burst open. Two men in black tactical vests, bearing the official Costa emblem, sprinted toward their car, weapons raised. "Mrs. Kwan, head down," Brick roared, drawing his own weapon. But the men weren't shooting. One reached the passenger window. "Code 3, we have a viable threat," he shouted, his voice muffled. "Mister, Costa sent us. We have to move her." Mrs. Kwan, dazed but ever sharp, squinted at him. "Your authorization code, I don't recognize you." The man didn't answer. He used a Halligan tool to smash the reinforced passenger window. Glass exploded inwards. He reached inside, unlocked the door, and grabbed for Lena. Mrs. Kwan, with a furious cry, lunged across the console. A small black taser in her hand. The man's response was instant and brutal. He struck her once, hard, on the temple with the butt of his pistol. "Mrs." Kwan slumped, unconscious, against the door. "No," Lena screamed. A hand clamped over her mouth from behind as the rear door was ripped open. She was dragged, kicking and fighting, out of the wrecked car. The air was filled with smoke and the sound of Orlando's team engaging the other men from the truck. But it was too late. Lena was bundled into a black van waiting in the tunnel's maintenance lane. The entire operation took less than 30 seconds. The van sped off, disappearing out of the tunnel before Orlando, blocked by the collision, could intercept at that exact moment. Severin Costa sat at the head of a polished mahogany table in a secure, windowless room. The other 6 leaders of the Harbor Street Council were present, old, hard men. They were deep in a tense negotiation over new shipping tariffs. Severin was mid-sentence when the phone in his suit pocket, the private one, the one only Orlando had the number for, vibrated. Not a call, a text. Protocol dictated that nothing interrupted these meetings. Severin paused, his gaze dropping to his lap. He read the 3 words on the screen. Convoy hit, Lena gone. The change was immediate. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin taut, pale, and terrifying. The controlled, diplomatic negotiator vanished, replaced by the predator. He stood up. The legs of his heavy chair scraped the floor, a sound that cut through the silence of the room. An old boss named Mateo, smoke from his cigar curling around his head, grunted, "We are not finished." Costa. Severin looked at him. His eyes were flat, cold, and so empty of anything but lethal intent that Mateo actually flinched. "We are," Severin said. He turned and walked out, leaving the 6 most powerful criminals in the city staring at his empty chair. The message was absolute. The girl was more important than the harbor. Lena was shoved onto a damp, mildewed floor. The air stank of rust, salt, and decay. Pier 47, a long-abandoned ferry terminal, its structure rotting into the dark waters of the bay. Caleb was there, pacing, his phone in his hand. He was vibrating with a manic, triumphant energy. His expensive suit was rumpled, his eyes were wild. "Get her up, put her in the chair," he snapped. 2 of the South Pier men, rough and grimy, hauled Lena to her feet and shoved her into a heavy iron chair. They began securing her wrists to the arms with thick zip ties. Caleb aimed his phone's camera at her. He was on a live, encrypted feed. "You see?" he yelled, not at Lena, but at the screen. "I have her. I have Costa's property. You want her back. You wipe the file. You wipe my name. You hear me? You clear me with the BFI, or she goes into the harbor." He was bargaining frantically, with a dark web contact he believed could erase his federal problems. Lena watched him, the raw panic from the tunnel solidifying into a cold, hard calm. She was no longer the terrified woman from the Velvet Anchor. She had lived with Severin. She had seen true, quiet power. Caleb, in his screaming desperation, just looked small. "They're coming for you. Caleb," she said, her voice, steady and clear, cut through his rant. He stopped, staring at her, stunned by her lack of fear. What did you say? He's coming, Lena repeated, meeting his wild gaze. And it's not going to be the police. You can't win this. You've already lost. His face twisted in rage. The truth of her words struck a nerve, and he lunged, his hand raised to strike her. He stopped, his fist shaking an inch from her face. She was his only leverage. He couldn't damage the asset. "Shut up," he screamed. "Shut up, tie her tight. He wants her. He's going to pay." Outside, a cold rain began to fall. Pier 47 was a dark skeleton against the bruised evening sky. Severin's black SUV rolled to a silent stop 2 blocks away, its lights off. He stepped out, his dark suit now covered by a heavy, tactical coat. Orlando and Brick emerged with him, along with a 4th man, a sniper known only as Rook. It was a hunting party, not an army. A full-scale war would bring the entire city down. This was a surgical removal. Severin looked at the rotting warehouse, his face carved from ice. He put in his earpiece, his voice a low, lethal command that cut through the sound of the rain. "Rook, you take the roof. I want eyes on every exit. Brick, Orlando, with me. No stray rounds. I don't care who else is in there. Not one bullet touches her. I'm going in first." The rain fell in a steady, cold drizzle, masking the sound of Severin's movements. He didn't use the main entrance. He moved along the rotting wharf, his feet silent on the slick, treacherous wood, and slipped through a collapsed service door he remembered from his youth. This pier was his old territory. When he was 19, he'd moved contraband through these very maintenance tunnels. He knew every shadow, every weak floorboard. He left Brick and Orlando at the perimeter to establish a crossfire. Inside, the warehouse was a cavern of darkness, punctuated by a few weak, battery-powered lanterns that Caleb's men had set up, casting long, grotesque shadows. Severin moved through the maze of rusted equipment, a ghost in the dark. One by one, the South Pier men vanished. The guard at the east stairwell slumped to the ground with a choked gasp, Orlando's garrote wire pulling him into the shadows. The second man, patrolling the main floor, simply dropped, a small, dark hole appearing in his chest from Brick's suppressed rifle, a round placed with surgical precision. Caleb was in the center of the vast room, his back to the black, lapping water of the open ferry bay. He was still yelling into his phone, bargaining with his anonymous contact. "I'm not kidding, I'll do it, I'll drop her in the water." "He's not answering," one of his remaining 2 thugs said, his voice trembling. "Milo and Vic, they're not answering their radios." Caleb's head snapped up, his manic energy turning to raw, animal panic. He finally realized the silence was not a good thing. "Where are you?" he shrieked into the darkness. "Show yourself." He grabbed Lena, yanking her out of the iron chair by her hair, the zip ties on her wrists held fast. He dragged her in front of him, a human shield, and pressed the cold steel barrel of his pistol to her throat. The metal bit into her skin. "Come out! Costa!" Caleb screamed, his voice cracking. "I swear to God, I'll shoot her. I'll shoot her right here." "Let her go." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Severin stepped out from behind a massive, rusted shipping container, about 50 feet away. He was perfectly calm, his hands empty and held level at his waist. He was not looking at Caleb. His eyes, dark and unblinking, were fixed entirely on Lena. "Put the gun down, Caleb," Severin said, his voice impossibly low, yet carrying across the entire space. "That is the last time I will say it nicely." "You did this," Caleb shrieked, his arm tightening, pressing the gun so hard into Lena's neck she winced. "She was mine. She was fine until she betrayed me. She sold me out to the feds." Severin took one slow, deliberate step forward. The cold, utter lack of fear on his face seemed to make Caleb shrink. "You put your hands on a woman," Severin said, his voice dropping to a glacial, contemptuous whisper. "And you still think you deserve to be loved." The insult, so precise, so true, shattered Caleb's remaining control. He was about to speak, to scream, when a sharp static crackle filled Lena's ear. Severin's earpiece, still in, had picked up Orlando's voice, loud enough for her to hear. "Severin, we have inbound. 2 black and whites, MAPD markings, no sirens. They're not real cops. It's his cleanup crew." Severin's eyes flickered. He had to end this. Now. He looked back at Lena, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second, a silent, powerful communication. She understood. "Lena," he said, his voice firm, commanding. "Close your eyes." She didn't question it. She didn't hesitate. She squeezed her eyes shut, a strange, absolute trust flooding her. It was his signal. It meant she wouldn't see the flash. It meant she wouldn't flinch. The whump of Brick's high-caliber, suppressed rifle was a cough in the darkness. It was not a kill shot. It was a disarm. The round struck Caleb's right forearm with the force of a hammer, shattering the bone. Caleb screamed, a high, thin sound of agony. His fingers spasmed open. The gun clattered uselessly to the concrete floor. "Now!" Severin roared. Lena didn't wait. She ripped her hands free, the zip ties scraping her raw, and she ran, scrambling toward Severin. The remaining two thugs opened fire, their automatic weapons erupting with panic, filling the warehouse with deafening, echoing thunder and sparks. Severin was already moving, meeting her halfway. He grabbed her, his arm like a steel band around her waist, and he didn't just pull her back. He threw himself and her sideways, crashing behind a stack of steel shipping containers. He twisted midair, ensuring he took the full, bruising impact of the concrete, his body completely shielding hers from the hail of bullets that sparked and ricocheted off the metal above their heads. The gunfire stopped, replaced by two more, singular, heavy thumps from Brick's rifle. Then, silence. Severin didn't move for a long second, his heavy breathing hot against her ear, his body a crushing, protective weight. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "Are you hurt?" "No," she whispered, her voice shaking. "No, I'm okay." He rolled off her, his gun now in his hand, and peeked around the container. Caleb was on the ground, clutching his ruined arm, sobbing and cursing. The other two men were dark, unmoving shapes on the floor. Caleb looked up, his face a mask of hate and pain. You're dead, Costa. You'll never be clean." Severin stood up and walked toward him, his face a mask of cold fury. Lena scrambled to her feet. "Severin, don't—" He didn't stop, but he wasn't looking at Caleb's face. He was looking at his phone. He dialed a number. "He won't be a problem," he said, his voice flat. He turned his gaze to Caleb. "But he's not my kill." He put the phone to his ear. "This is Costa. I have a gift for you. Pier 47. Yes, that's him. My present to the Bureau for all their hard work. You'll find him. And his friends from the South Pier outfit, all tied up for you. Consider it professional courtesy." He hung up. He had a mole in the BFI, a high-level agent on his payroll. By handing Caleb over, alive, Severin was solving the BFI's case, making them heroes, and erasing Caleb from the board without a single drop of federal blowback. It was the cleanest, most ruthless move possible. The adrenaline began to recede. Lena started to shake, a full body tremor. The fake MAPD cars were now pulling up, sirens suddenly blaring, but Orlando and Brick had already intercepted them, and the very real, very grateful BFI was 10 minutes out. Severin turned, his entire focus snapping back to her. He crossed the distance in 3 strides. He didn't hug her. He grabbed her face, his hands hard, calloused, and shaking just slightly. His thumbs brushed over her cheekbones, his eyes wild, checking her for every tiny scratch, every bruise. His voice was a low, rasping sound, hoarse with the adrenaline and the terror he had refused to show. "I told you," he whispered, his forehead pressing against hers, his eyes squeezed shut. "I told you, I will not let him hurt you." Lena's hands came up and gripped his wrists. She clung to him. In the middle of the cold, damp, rotting warehouse, the smell of cordite in the air, she was in love with the most dangerous man in Kings Bay, and he had just started a war for her. And ended it. Not with a bullet to the head, but with a phone call, all to keep her clean. He had the power to kill, and he had chosen not to. The official story, as reported by the Kings Bay Chronicle, was neat. An anonymous tip had led federal agents to Pier 47, where they apprehended the fugitive financier Caleb Dre and dismantled a cell of the South Pier outfit. It was a major victory for the Bureau of Financial Integrity. Severin Costa's name was mentioned nowhere. Caleb, facing a mountain of evidence from both the BFI and the new testimony provided by his captured associates, was transferred to a federal holding facility. His trial was a formality. His threat was officially and permanently erased from the board. The Harbor Street Council was not pleased. At first, the emergency meeting, reconvened without Severin, had been tense. The old bosses were furious that he had abandoned their business, their sacred neutrality, for a girl. But when the news of the BFI raid broke, the entire narrative shifted. By gifting a high-profile, wanted criminal like Caleb Dre to the feds, Severin had done the impossible. He had, in one move, satisfied the federal beast, preventing the widespread, invasive investigation that would have inevitably followed Caleb's murder or disappearance. He had turned a personal vendetta into a brilliant political move that protected the council's own interests. Reluctantly, they accepted the new reality. Lena Porter was no longer just a girl. She was a factor, and she was, by extension, untouchable. Lena's remaining belongings, the 2 duffel bags she had been living out of, were retrieved from Jules's apartment. But this time, they were not placed in the guest suite. Mrs. Kwan, with a rare, almost imperceptible smile, had overseen the integration of Lena's few clothes into Severin's own master closet. The vast walk-in was reorganized, her items placed alongside his. The bathroom was stocked with her preferences. The biometric scanner on the master bedroom door was reprogrammed to accept her fingerprint. She was no longer hiding. She was home. That night, they stood by the glass wall, watching a freighter glide silently into the harbor. Severin came up behind her. He didn't just place a hand on her back. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest, his chin resting on her hair. "You need to understand," he said, his voice low, vibrating against her. "Before, you were someone I was protecting to achieve a goal. To stop Caleb, that has changed." She waited, her heart slowing to match his. "You are now someone I love," he stated. Not as a poetic declaration, but as a statement of unchangeable fact. In my world, that is a weakness. It's a vulnerability I cannot afford, and a target I cannot hide. But I find that I accept it. I accept you. Lena knew she had her own declaration to make. The next day, she contacted her BFI handler. She didn't just clarify her testimony, she restructured it. She gave them everything she had on Caleb's methods, his digital trails, the offshore accounts, the pieces that would keep him in prison for 50 years while meticulously, legally. Removing her own name from the public-facing witness list, she filed for an official seal on her involvement, citing the kidnapping and the clear, present danger to her life. She was not just protecting herself, she was reducing the pressure on Severin's organization, cutting the last official thread that tied her to his enemies. She was protecting him back, to mark the end of the threat. They held a dinner. It was not a grand affair at the art hall. It was a small, quiet meal served by Mrs. Kwan on the penthouse roof terrace, under a canopy of warm string lights. The guest list was 5 people. Jules was there, her eyes wide at the surroundings, who cried and hugged Lena so tight she almost cracked a rib, whispering, "You got the king, you crazy woman." Orlando and Brick stood awkwardly near the edge, nursing bottles of Severin's best beer, their dark suits replaced by casual shirts. They were, for the first time, visibly off-duty, and Mrs. Kwan, who watched over the proceedings with a quiet, satisfied pride. It was a strange, mismatched collection of people. A bartender, 2 bodyguards, a housekeeper, a mafia boss, and an architect. But looking around the table, Lena realized it was the first family she had ever truly felt part of. They were celebrating no more Caleb. Later, after the others had left, Lena and Severin stood by the edge of the terrace, the cool night wind of the bay whipping around them. "He won't be the last," Severin said quietly, looking down at the city lights. "There will always be another enemy." "Lena, I know," she said, not flinching. "I want them to know who you are," and he replied. He turned to her, pulling a small black velvet box from his pocket. It was not large. He opened it. Inside was not a gaudy, multi-carat diamond. It was an elegant, heavy platinum band centered with a single, deep blue, square-cut sapphire. It was beautiful, understated, and looked as strong as steel. He did not get on one knee. He did not ask her to make him the happiest man alive. He took her left hand, his gaze intense, his thumb brushing over the pulse in her wrist. "In my world," he said, his voice rough, "there is no faster way to die than to touch a boss's family." He slid the ring onto her finger. A perfect, heavy fit. "No one," he said, the words a vow, "dares to touch Costa's wife." Lena looked at the ring, then up at his face. Her eyes were shining, but not with tears of fear or relief. It was joy. It was peace. "The night I met you," she whispered, "I sat on your lap to survive." She put her free hand on his chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart. "Now I'm staying to live." He pulled her close, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that wasn't about desperation or rescue, but about a shared, permanent future. They stood together, wrapped in each other's arms, looking out over the glittering, dangerous sprawl of Kings Bay. The city was still full of shadows, still run by criminals and contracts, but for the first time in her life, Lena Porter felt completely, utterly safe. The most dangerous man in the city loved her, and she loved him back. He said softly, "I won't let him hurt you." And he never did. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We're dying to know where you're tuning in from. Let us know in the comments below so we can connect. If you loved this, please subscribe to Mafia Boss Stories, give this video a like, and hit that hype button to help us share this story with even more people.